On the morning of October 14, 2019, a man named Daniel Voss walked through the front doors of Hargrove Memorial Hospital in Duluth, Minnesota, sat down at the reception desk and asked, completely calmly, to see a woman he had never met. A woman who had been unconscious for 8 years. A woman who had woken up exactly 4 hours before he arrived. By the end of this story, you will understand why that timing was not a coincidence. And what investigators eventually uncovered about Daniel Voss and Eleanor Marsh will make you question everything you think you know about the line between obsession and something far darker, something that doesn't have a clean name in any case file. But to understand what happened the morning Daniel walked through those doors, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to go back to the night Eleanor Marsh stopped being a person and became a mystery. It was February 6, 2011. Duluth was the kind of cold that doesn't ask permission, the kind that comes through the walls of buildings and lives in your teeth. Eleanor Marsh was 31 years old, a high school art teacher at Lincoln Park Middle and High School on West 3rd Street. A woman her colleagues described as quietly intense, deeply private, and extraordinarily talented. She had dark brown hair she kept in a loose braid, a habit of wearing paint-stained flannel shirts over sundresses regardless of the season, and, by all accounts, no known enemies. No complicated romantic history that anyone could trace. No debts. No feuds. She lived alone in a second-floor apartment on East Superior Street, kept a cat named Lorca, and graded papers at a corner table in a coffee shop called Blackwater Grounds every Thursday evening without fail. She was found at 11:47 p.m. on February 6th at the bottom of the exterior staircase leading up to her apartment. The temperature outside was -14 degrees. She had been lying there long enough that the responding paramedics, Officer Craig Duluth and his partner Sandra Flores, initially believed they were responding to a fatality. There was blood on the ice beneath her head. Her hands were bare. She was wearing her coat over the flannel shirt, which suggested she had been either arriving home or preparing to leave. Investigators could never confirm which. Her keys were in her coat pocket. Her phone was 17 feet away, face down in a drift of compacted snow near the base of the railing, as if it had been thrown or had skidded from her hand during the fall. The official determination was accidental. A patch of black ice on the 3rd step. Tragic, simple, closed. Eleanor Marsh was transported to Hargrove Memorial Hospital, admitted to the neurology unit, and slipped into a coma from which no one expected her to return. Her parents, Robert and Diane Marsh of Hibbing, drove down the next morning and were told, gently but directly, to begin making arrangements. They did not. They sat vigil instead. For 8 years, in rotating shifts, with the determination of people who have made a private deal with God and intend to hold up their end, the Marsh family maintained a presence in that hospital room. Eleanor's younger sister, Petra, moved to Duluth in 2013. She found work at a dental office on London Road and visited every single day before her shift. And here is the detail that every nurse on the 3rd floor of Hargrove Memorial will tell you about without being asked. The detail that made its way eventually to a detective named Rosa Calindra in the Duluth Police Department's cold case unit, and then to a forensic psychiatrist, and then to a federal database query that came back with results nobody in that building was prepared for. Starting sometime in the late spring of 2012, approximately 14 months after Eleanor's admission, the nursing staff began to notice drawings on the walls of her room. Not violent, not alarming in the way you might expect. Just faces. The same face, rendered over and over in whatever was available. A leaky ballpoint pen, a blunt eyeliner pencil borrowed from a visitor's purse, once in what appeared to be diluted iodine solution on a folded paper towel. Always the same man. Square jaw, deep-set eyes. A slight asymmetry to the left brow that one nurse described as making the face look permanently, faintly amused. Eleanor Marsh was unconscious. Her motor responses were negligible. She had scored a 4 on the Glasgow Coma scale for the better part of 2 years. And yet, the drawings kept appearing. Rosa Calindra would later tell a colleague that in 11 years of investigative work, she had never opened a case file and felt the temperature in the room physically drop. But that was before she pulled the security footage from the 3rd floor hallway, footage covering a 72-hour window in March of 2015, and saw something that made her sit back in her chair and not speak for almost 4 minutes. Eleanor Marsh opened her eyes for the first time at 6:18 a.m. on October 14, 2019. She was disoriented, weak, and largely nonverbal. Her mother was holding her hand. A nurse named Bethany Okafor was adjusting her foreline. The room was soft with early morning light coming through blinds that were never quite fully closed. By 7 a.m., Eleanor had squeezed her mother's fingers. By 7:45, she had said the word water. By 8:30, the neurologist on duty, Dr. Philip Strauss, had been called in from home and was describing what he was witnessing as the most significant spontaneous recovery from prolonged coma he had encountered in 22 years of practice. At 10:23 a.m., a man walked into the hospital lobby. He was approximately 40 years old, medium height, dark coat, calm expression. He approached the reception desk, gave his name as Daniel Voss, and asked politely to be directed to Eleanor Marsh's room. When the receptionist asked how he knew Eleanor, he paused for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said, "She's been waiting for me." The receptionist's name was Carol Mines. She had worked that front desk at Hargrove Memorial for 11 years, and she would later tell Detective Rosa Calindra that the thing which unsettled her most wasn't what Daniel Voss said. It was the way he said it. No urgency, no nervousness, the flat, patient certainty of a man who had rehearsed a very long wait and was simply, finally, done with it. She told him she couldn't provide room information without verification of relationship. He nodded, as if he'd expected that, and sat down in one of the blue chairs along the east wall of the lobby. He folded his hands in his lap. He did not look at his phone. He did not look at the door. He looked, Carol would say, at nothing in particular, with the focused, interior expression of someone listening to music only they could hear. She called security. Then she called the third-floor nursing station. The third-floor nursing station transferred her to Bethany Okafor, who had been Eleanor Marsh's primary nurse for the past 3 years and who, when she heard the name Daniel Voss spoken aloud for the first time in her life, felt, by her own account, a physical jolt of recognition she could not immediately explain. Because she had heard that name before. Not spoken. Written. On the wall. Behind Eleanor's bedside table. In a corner the cleaning staff had apparently missed during a 2017 repaint. There was a strip of bare drywall approximately 4 inches wide and 8 inches tall. On it, in handwriting that forensic document examiners would later confirm matched Eleanor Marsh's pre-coma samples, were 2 words written in what appeared to be dried blood, though initial tests were inconclusive on the source. The words were, "Daniel comes." Bethany Okafor had discovered that inscription in January of 2018. She had photographed it on her personal phone, reported it to the floor supervisor, and been told, in a conversation she described as surprisingly brief and surprisingly firm, that it was most likely old notation from before Eleanor's admission, that the room had a history of occupants, and that it was not a matter requiring escalation. The supervisor's name was Marcus Fenn. Rosa Calindra would spend 6 weeks trying to confirm whether Marcus Fenn had acted on his own judgment in that moment, or whether he had been directed to close the conversation down. She never got a satisfying answer. What she did get, what cracked the whole case open like a fault line, was the security footage. The footage she had viewed in March of 2015, the footage that had made her sit in silence for 4 minutes. When she finally showed it to her partner, Detective Ansel Broff, she watched him watch it twice, and then she watched him look at her with an expression she had never seen on his face in 9 years of working alongside him. Something between professional disbelief and something rawer than that. The footage showed Eleanor Marsh's room. Corridor view, camera angle catching the partially open doorway. The timestamp read 3:14 a.m., March 9, 2015. The floor was quiet. The night staff had completed their 3 a.m. rounds. And in the doorway of Eleanor's room, visible from the shoulders down because the camera angle cut off above 5 feet, stood a figure in a dark coat. Not moving, not entering the room, just standing in the threshold for 4 minutes and 51 seconds. Then walking away down the hall, unhurried, and turning left toward the stairwell exit. The same exit that, when Rosa checked, had a non-functioning card reader that had been logged as broken since November of 2014 and had not been repaired until April of 2015. 5 months. The stairwell door had been unsecured for 5 months. Rosa had submitted that footage to facial recognition in 2015. The partial view, shoulders, coat, hands, had returned nothing usable. She had submitted it again in 2018 with a new processing filter. Still nothing. She had, by October of 2019, largely filed Daniel Voss in the part of her mind reserved for cases that live rent-free and never pay up. And then he walked through the front door and introduced himself. Rosa was at the hospital within 22 minutes of Carol Mine's call. She found Daniel Voss exactly where Carol had left him. Seated, still, hands folded. She sat down across from him, identified herself, and asked him directly how he knew Eleanor Marsh. He looked at her with the kind of composure that takes years to build or years to hollow out. She couldn't tell which and said that he didn't know Eleanor Marsh. Not the way Rosa meant. He said that Eleanor knew him. He said that the distinction was important. When Rosa pressed him on what that meant, he smiled for the first time. It was a small, careful smile. He said, "You've seen the drawings." It was not a question. Rosa held his gaze and said nothing. And in that silence, Daniel Voss reached into the interior pocket of his coat and placed a single item on the chair between them. A folded piece of paper, worn at the creases, the kind of worn that happens over years of opening and closing. Rosa unfolded it without touching her face. The way you handle something you're not sure about yet. It was a drawing. Pencil on what looked like a page torn from a composition notebook. A woman's face. Dark hair in a loose braid. A certain quietness around the eyes that could have been serenity or could have been something altogether different. It was Eleanor Marsh. Unmistakably, precisely Eleanor Marsh. And in the bottom right corner, in small printed letters, was a date. January 2009. 2 years before Eleanor's fall. 2 years before the accident that wasn't quite officially an accident. 2 years before any version of this story that anyone had been able to construct from the available facts. Rosa put the drawing down. She looked at Daniel Voss. He said, "I've been drawing her face since I was 19 years old. I never knew her name until this morning. I found her obituary by accident. Only it wasn't an obituary. She wasn't dead." Rosa asked him what obituary. He told her it had been published in the Duluth News-Tribune in March of 2011, 1 month after Eleanor's fall, listing Eleanor Catherine Marsh as deceased following a tragic accident. It had run for 2 days before being pulled, apparently at the family's request, following a determination that it had been submitted in error. Rosa had never seen it. It was not in any file she had reviewed. She asked him who submitted it. He said he didn't know. He said he had assumed it was a family member acting prematurely on grief. He said that for 8 years he had believed the woman whose face lived in his hands like a recurring dream was dead. He had driven to Duluth to visit her grave. He had pulled up the hospital's name from the obituary, Hargrove Memorial, and stopped there first on the way to the cemetery, not entirely sure why, following something he couldn't name. And the woman at the front desk had looked at him strangely when he gave Eleanor's name. And then she had looked at her screen, and something in her expression had shifted. That was when he'd known. Rosa sat with all of this for a long moment. Then she excused herself, walked to the elevator bank, rode to the 3rd floor, and stood in the doorway of Eleanor Marsh's room. Eleanor was awake, pale, fragile, blinking slowly at the ceiling with the careful expression of someone relearning what light is. Her mother was still beside her. Petra was in the corner chair, pressed against the wall, clutching a coffee cup with both hands. And Eleanor's eyes, tracking slowly across the room, found Rosa in the doorway. And Rosa, without fully deciding to, said, "Eleanor, I need to ask you about someone named Daniel Voss." The monitors didn't change. Eleanor's expression didn't change. But her mother made a sound. A short, involuntary sound from somewhere deep in the chest, and stood up very quickly from her chair. And Petra, in the corner, went completely still. Rosa turned to look at her. Petra Marsh was staring not at Rosa, not at Eleanor. She was staring at the wall behind Rosa's left shoulder, at a section of drywall near the window that the early morning light was hitting at an angle it likely never hit any other time of day. And in that light, something was visible that would not have been visible otherwise. Something beneath the surface of the last repaint. The ghost of lines, pressed deep into the plaster. A face. The same face. Square jaw, deep-set eyes, that slight asymmetry in the left brow, rendered so many times in the same spot that the image had become structural, had become part of the wall itself. Petra set her coffee cup down on the floor very slowly. She said, in a voice that had lost all its shape, "We painted over them." Rosa looked at her. "How many times?" Petra looked up. But nothing could have prepared them for what was waiting inside that room. Because Eleanor Marsh, who had been awake for less than 5 hours, who had spoken fewer than 30 words, who was still relearning the weight of her own hands. Eleanor Marsh turned her head toward the wall where the ghost face pressed through the paint, and she said, clearly and without hesitation, the first complete sentence she had spoken since 2011. She said, "He has to leave. He doesn't know what he is." The monitor beeped. The morning light moved. And somewhere downstairs, in a blue chair in the lobby of Hargrove Memorial Hospital, Daniel Voss was still waiting. And in the interior pocket of his coat, behind where he'd kept the drawing, there was something Rosa had not seen him place there. Something the lobby camera caught at 10:19 a.m., 4 minutes before he approached the desk. A small bound notebook, dark cover. He had opened it, looked at something inside, and closed it again before standing up. The notebook was never recovered. And Daniel Voss, when Rosa came back down to the lobby 40 minutes later to bring him in for formal questioning, was gone. He was gone. Rosa Calindra stood in the lobby of Hargrove Memorial Hospital at 11:09 a.m. on October 14, 2019, looking at an empty blue chair, and felt the particular nausea that comes not from surprise but from the recognition that you have been outmaneuvered by someone who had been playing a longer game than you knew existed. She pulled the lobby footage within the hour. The camera at the east entrance showed Daniel Voss standing up from his chair at 10:51 a.m., buttoning his coat with the unhurried precision of a man finishing a meal, and walking calmly through the sliding doors into the gray October morning. No running, no looking back. The camera at the parking structure entrance showed nothing, a 4-minute gap in recording that the hospital's IT department would later attribute to a scheduled system reboot that Rosa found, when she checked the maintenance logs, had been manually initiated at 10:48 a.m. from a terminal in the basement administrative office. That terminal required a staff access code. The code used belonged to Marcus Fenn, the same Marcus Fenn who had told Bethany Okafor 18 months earlier that the inscription Daniel comes was not a matter requiring escalation. Marcus Fenn, when Rosa reached him by phone at 11:47 a.m., said he had no idea what she was talking about. He said he hadn't been in the building that morning. His access log, when pulled, showed his code had been used to enter the building at 9:14 a.m. and exit at 10:06 a.m. The administrative terminal access at 10:48 was logged under his code, but the front entrance camera, the one with uninterrupted coverage, showed definitively that Marcus Fenn was not in the building at 10:48. His code was used by someone who was not Marcus Fenn, someone who had his code. Someone who knew the system reboot would create a gap in parking structure coverage. Someone who had planned for the possibility that Daniel Voss might need to leave quickly and leave clean. Rosa arrested Marcus Fenn on December 3, 2019. Not for the terminal access, he maintained plausibly and persistently that his code had been stolen. She arrested him because of what investigators found when they finally executed a search warrant on his home in the Kenwood neighborhood of Duluth. In his home office, in a locked filing cabinet, were 11 years of printed photographs. All of them taken inside Hargrove Memorial Hospital. All of them showing the same room, showing Eleanor Marsh, showing the drawings on the walls, catalogued and dated in Marcus Fenn's handwriting with a precision that suggested not voyeurism but documentation. The kind of documentation you do when you are reporting to someone. The name at the top of the most recent set of photographs, written on the folder tab in red marker, was not Daniel Voss. It was a name Rosa didn't recognize. She ran it through every database available to her and came back with almost nothing. A single reference in a 2003 academic paper on anomalous psychological phenomena published by a small research institute based in Reykjavik, Iceland. The paper had 14 listed contributors. The name on Marcus Fenn's folder was not among the authors. It appeared in the acknowledgments section. 3 words, thanking this person for what the paper's authors called foundational observational support. Rosa read that paper 4 times. She is not, by her own description, a person who deals in abstractions. She is a woman who works with evidence, with timelines, with the verifiable mechanics of human behavior. But she would tell you, and she has told colleagues on the record, during a review process that was itself quietly closed, that the paper's central subject matter, combined with what she found in Fenn's filing cabinet, combined with everything she had witnessed in that hospital room, produced in her a specific and persistent discomfort that she has not fully resolved to this day. The paper's subject was a documented phenomenon the researchers termed reciprocal imprinting, the theorized possibility that, under specific and poorly understood neurological conditions, two individuals with no prior contact could develop simultaneous, parallel, and structurally identical internal representations of one another. Not telepathy. Not anything so clean or dramatic as that. Something more granular, more biological, more deeply strange. The emergence, in two separate nervous systems, of the same image, the same face, built from the same inexplicable source material, across years of geographic separation. Eleanor Marsh had drawn Daniel Voss's face 147 times across the walls of her hospital room. Daniel Voss had been drawing Eleanor Marsh's face since he was 19 years old. Since 2009, 2 years before her fall, across sketchbooks and notebook margins and the backs of envelopes that he had, over 8 years, filled and saved and carried with him. When forensic document examiners compared the two bodies of work, Eleanor's wall drawings and Daniel's sketchbooks, which he had left behind at the motel where he'd been staying, a fact Rosa discovered 3 days after he disappeared, they found something that stopped the lead examiner mid-report. The proportions were identical. Not similar. Identical within the margin of human error. Two people who had never met had produced anatomically equivalent portraits of each other across a decade of separation. The examiner wrote in her notes, "I have no professional framework for this finding." Daniel Voss was located on November 18, 2019, in a small town outside of Thunder Bay, Ontario. He was cooperative. He answered every question Rosa and her Canadian counterpart put to him across 2 days of formal interviews. He explained, calmly and in detail, that the notebook the lobby camera had captured him opening that morning contained, among other things, the name of the person who had submitted Eleanor Marsh's false obituary in March of 2011. He said he had found the name through his own research over the years, research born of obsession. He acknowledged that freely, the obsession of a man who had spent years trying to understand why a dead woman's face lived inside his hands like something inherited. He had traced the obituary submission through a Duluth News-Tribune contact who had kept an internal record of the original submission email. The email account was defunct, but the name attached to it was the same name on Marcus Fenn's folder tab. The same name in the Reykjavik acknowledgements. Rosa asked Daniel why he had run. He said he hadn't run. He said he had left because Eleanor had told him to. Not in the room, he had never reached Eleanor's room. But the night before, in a dream, which he understood was not evidence of anything, but which he offered because she had asked him to be honest. He said Eleanor had told him, in this dream, that coming to the hospital was necessary but that staying would make things worse. That there were people watching the hospital who were not there for her benefit. That the notebook needed to be somewhere safe before anyone took it. Rosa asked him where the notebook was. He slid it across the table without a word. It was recovered, logged, and entered into evidence on November 19, 2019. Marcus Fenn was convicted on 4 counts including unlawful surveillance, unauthorized access to protected health information, and obstruction. He received a sentence of 6 years. He never provided the name of who he had been reporting to. His lawyer described him, at sentencing, as a man motivated by a genuine and misguided belief that he was participating in legitimate scientific observation. The judge found that explanation insufficient. Rosa found it, privately, more plausible than she wished. The person named on Fenn's folder and in Daniel's notebook was never charged. Investigators in 3 jurisdictions spent the better part of 2020 attempting to establish a prosecutable connection between that individual and the false obituary, the broken stairwell card reader, the black ice on February 6, 2011. They established a circumstantial web that was, by every account, deeply suggestive. It was not enough. The case was not closed. It was shelved. Eleanor Marsh spent 4 months in rehabilitation at Hargrove Memorial and was discharged on February 11, 2020. Her neurological recovery, while incomplete, exceeded every projection. She walks with a cane. She has recovered significant fine motor control in her right hand. She resumed teaching part-time at a community arts center in Duluth in the fall of 2021. She has never publicly discussed Daniel Voss. Daniel Voss returned to his home in Marquette, Michigan, and, as far as anyone in this story knows, has not returned to Duluth. What is known, because Rosa Calindra confirmed it, and because Petra Marsh, who has been significantly more willing to speak than her sister, confirmed it separately, is that Eleanor and Daniel met once. Briefly, in the parking lot of a diner on Highway 61, 3 weeks after his interview in Thunder Bay, 2 weeks before Eleanor's discharge from the hospital. Rosa does not know who arranged it. She suspects no one arranged it. She suspects it was simply two people with the same face in their hands, finally standing in the same place at the same time, trying to understand what that meant. Petra says Eleanor came home from that meeting quiet in a way that was different from her usual quiet. Settled, Petra said, like something had been answered. She never asked Eleanor what was said. Eleanor never offered it. Here is what Rosa Calindra said in the last conversation I had with her about this case, when I asked her what she actually believed had happened. Not legally, not clinically, but what she believed in her gut after 4 years of living with it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The thing that keeps her up is not the surveillance, not the false obituary, not even the question of whether someone deliberately put Eleanor Marsh at the bottom of those stairs on a night cold enough to kill. All of that is terrible. All of that is human and recognizable and falls within the category of things people do to each other for reasons she can trace, even if she can't always prove them. What keeps her up," she said, "is simpler than any of that. What keeps her up is a woman lying unconscious for 8 years in a hospital room, drawing a face she had never consciously seen, drawing it 147 times, with enough force, enough repetition, that the image pressed through every layer of paint and became part of the structure of the wall itself. And a man 2 states away drawing the same face back, not knowing why, not knowing her name, just drawing and drawing and drawing, the way you do when something inside you knows something your mind hasn't caught up with yet." Rosa said, "I don't know what that is. I've looked for a name for it in every file I have. There isn't one that fits." And then she said, "But I'll tell you this. The morning Eleanor woke up, the morning after 8 years, Daniel Voss was already in his car, already driving toward Duluth. He told us he woke up that morning and simply knew. He didn't know how he knew. He just knew it was time." She picked up her coffee. She looked out the window for a moment. "The drive from Marquette to Duluth," she said, "is 4 hours and 23 minutes. Eleanor Marsh woke up at 6:18 a.m. Daniel Voss arrived at 10:23 a.m. Rosa set her cup down and didn't say anything else. She didn't need to, because you've already done the math and you already know what it means, and you're sitting with the same thing she's been sitting with for 4 years, the question of what it says about the nature of human consciousness, about the borders of the self, about what we are actually capable of knowing and feeling and reaching toward across distances we have no business crossing. Whether the explanation lives in neuroscience or in something older and less mapped than that. Whether it matters which one it is. The official case file on Eleanor Marsh remains open. The person named in Daniel Voss's notebook has never been publicly identified. And in the Community Arts Center on East Superior Street in Duluth, Minnesota, there is a classroom where an art teacher with a cane and paint-stained flannel shirts over her sweaters works with teenagers on Thursday evenings. The walls of that classroom are covered in student work. Drawings, paintings, collages, faces of every kind. And if you ever find yourself in that building, on that street, in that particular quiet that Duluth settles into when the temperature drops below the point of asking permission, look at the lower left corner of the largest wall, just above the baseboard, in a spot you would only notice if you were looking for it. There is a single drawing, small and careful and worn at the edges like something carried a long time before being finally set down. A man's face, square jaw, deep-set eyes, a slight asymmetry in the left brow that makes the expression look, if you stand there long enough, like the end of a very long wait. No one has asked Eleanor about it. No one who works there is entirely sure they want to know. Some answers, it turns out, don't make the dark any smaller. They just give it a more precise shape. Every week, Mindshift Stories brings you the cases that keep investigators awake at night, the ones too disturbing for mainstream media. If that sounds like something you need, subscribe now and never miss a story.